Imagine a simple shepherd and caretaker of fig trees living in a quiet, remote village. He didn't study in the great religious schools, nor did he have fame or distinction among the powerful. But one day he received a surprising mission: to denounce the corruption of kings and priests, to warn of injustices that cried out to the heavens, and to announce a divine judgment that no one wanted to accept. This humble man, who came from the small town of Tekoa, became God's firm and relentless voice in a time of great prosperity, yet filled with abuse and inequalities. His name was Amos, the prophet who rose against everything and everyone to deliver a message that would change history. Get ready to learn about this remarkable journey and discover how the courage of an apparently ordinary man shook the structures of the kingdom. Did people listen to his warning? And what can we learn from this example of faith and determination? That's what we'll see now. If you enjoy the content, leave your "thank you very much" in the comments. This is the Mysteries of Faith channel, and it is a pleasure to make another video for you. Let's go. In the heart of Judah, there was a small village called Tekoa. It was a serene place, surrounded by vast fields, hills that shone under the burning sun, and fig trees that swayed gently in the wind. There, shepherds lived at a calm pace, tending to their sheep and devoting themselves to the simple tasks of the countryside. Few would have imagined that, from this nearly forgotten setting, one of the most striking voices of his time would emerge. From childhood, Amos followed an apparently unchanging routine. He tended his family's sheep, carefully navigating the slopes, and in his free time, he cultivated fig trees, especially the sycamores, which required constant care to bear fruit. His hands, calloused by daily labor, reflected the hard life of a country man. And, although he might have seemed like just another reserved shepherd, there was something different in his gaze, a sharp perception, an unrest that often went unnoticed in the calm of Tekoa. It was upon hearing the travelers' accounts, stories about the opulence of Samaria, the oppression of the poor, and the rampant greed of the powerful, that something awoke within him, a growing indignation that would not let him rest. While the world's routine continued as usual, Amos began to perceive a silent yet unmistakable voice germinating in his heart, like a call impossible to ignore. And then, on a day that promised to be like any other, that voice made itself heard in a way that would change his life forever. That day, which began like any other, the sun had barely risen and was already tinting the sky with shades of orange and gold. As he guided his sheep along quiet slopes, Amos felt the calm rhythm of the countryside, the soft sound of bells on the animals, the whisper of leaves in the breeze, and the gentle song of birds. Everything indicated a familiar routine, until a different and profound experience took hold of him. It was in a moment of solitude that Amos felt something much greater than himself. It was not an ordinary call, one that could be answered with mere words, but an intense sensation that ran through his body and filled his heart with certainty. God was commissioning him to announce an urgent message, a warning that would not be easy to hear. As much as Amos was just a shepherd and farmer, it was clear that this mission went beyond any obstacle. He was to head north, to the prosperous kingdom of Israel, and confront the injustices that were growing in the shadow of luxury and corruption. Without delay, Amos left Tekoa, carrying only the essentials. The journey was long and full of uncertainties, but the conviction to fulfill the divine purpose sustained him. As he approached Israel, rumors of opulence and inequality became increasingly evident. The contrast was revealed immediately in the capital, Samaria, where opulent palaces and bustling markets coexisted with narrow alleys filled with poverty. It was a place that dazzled the eyes of distant observers, but concealed misery and a cruel exploitation of the weak. In the face of such injustice, Amos did not remain silent. Amidst luxurious buildings and extravagant parties, he raised his voice in a way no one expected from a simple countryman. His first words were like the roar of thunder. They announced God's judgment against neighboring nations. The people of Israel, at first, even felt a certain relief, thinking that the warnings did not apply to them. However, suddenly the tone changed, and the prophet directly blamed the leaders and the rich of Israel. He exposed the manipulation of justice, the exploitation of the poor, and the empty religion that sought only prestige and appearances. What had once been just a murmur in the streets of Samaria quickly turned into a collective shock. Many tried to discredit Amos because of his humble origins, but they could not ignore the strength of his words. Like a roar that cannot be contained, the prophet's voice sounded firm and urgent, bringing forth truths that the people preferred to sweep under the rug. And so, amid the false splendor of that city, the message of a common man, chosen by God, began to shake the foundations of a kingdom that thought itself unshakable. Amos's voice remained steady, despite the criticisms and threats arising in Israel. He knew that he was not merely delivering warnings in words. Amid it all, God showed him powerful and very clear visions. In the first, Amos saw a lush field suddenly invaded by clouds of locusts. Nothing was left, not food nor hope, and he understood it was a terrible warning of destruction, crying out to God to show mercy. Soon after, another, even more intense image came, a fire that consumed even the deepest parts of the land, drying up rivers and devastating all life. Everything turned to ashes before his eyes. The third vision seemed simple, but carried a huge weight. God held a plumb line, like a builder measuring the firmness of a wall. In that moment, it became obvious that Israel was completely out of line with divine standards. Patience had run out, and Amos's message exposed the moral fragility of a kingdom that considered itself invulnerable. These revelations put the powerful of Israel on alert, especially Messias, the priest of Bethel. He saw in Amos's preaching a threat to the authority of the official temple. First, he attempted to accuse the prophet of conspiring against the king, claiming that his words were dangerous. But when that didn't work, he confronted Amos personally, trying to humiliate him because of his humble origins. Amos's response, however, was as precise as his prophecies. He was not a prophet by his own will, but a shepherd called by God. No political or religious intimidation would make him desist. In the midst of this tense climate, Amos continued preaching in the streets and squares, using metaphors that struck deep. To show how comfortable and greedy the life of Samaria's elite was, he called them Baasan's cows, comparing them to fat animals living at the expense of those who had less. His words sounded like a sword, dividing the population between those who rejected him and the few who began to reflect on the true state of the kingdom. Even so, Amos remained faithful to the mission entrusted to him, confronting governors, priests, and anyone who tried to silence that voice which, though simple, came directly from God. Stay until the end, because we will reflect on all of this in today's context. Amos spoke so clearly about greed and oppression that even the most distracted could grasp his message. He described, almost like a photographer, merchants manipulating scales to overcharge and selling even the remnants of wheat as if they were fine food. He also denounced the emptiness of the religious ceremonies in Bethel and Gilgal, grand festivals and sacrifices, but with no sincerity in the heart. Amos's voice echoed, "Enough with appearances. Let justice run like a mighty river." It was a direct blow to the pretensions of a people who took pride in their rituals, yet forgot empathy and respect for their neighbors. Even in the face of mocking laughter or looks of disdain, Amos did not back down. He understood that God did not give warnings without also offering hope. Amid visions of destruction and fire consuming everything, the prophet described a different future, a complete renewal. He spoke of times when the tent of David would be raised again, symbolizing a return to fidelity and a pure communion with the Creator. He announced an era when the fields would be so fertile that they could barely keep up with the harvest, and where the scattered people would be gathered together. It was like a spark of light in the midst of darkness, signaling that despite the chaos, there was a chance to start over. However, the more Amos pointed out injustice, the stronger the resistance of the powerful became. Many tried to discredit his message because he did not fit the typical profile of a prophet. Even so, he maintained the conviction that he had been called by God and that nothing or no one would silence him before he fulfilled his mission. Then, suddenly, Amos withdrew from the crowds. He had already said all he needed to say. His disappearance created a silence even more striking than his own words, leaving people to reflect on what they had just heard. Some continued to mock, others felt uneasy, but the seeds he had planted were already scattered to the wind. We do not know for sure how Amos's life ended, or even if he returned to peaceful Tekoa to tend his sheep and fig trees. What remains is the echo of his words, passed down from generation to generation, reminding the people that true worship is inseparable from justice and compassion. His denunciations, filled with courage and truth, were like a mirror revealing the flaws of a society trapped in its own vanity. And even though the prophet disappeared from the pages of history, his warnings remain alive, inviting each new generation to choose between the path of appearances and the undeniable river of God's justice. And you, what would you do if you heard this call? Would you be ready to stand up against injustice and bring hope, even if it costs your own peace? Amos's story continues to echo, waiting for our response. Leave yours in the comments. Amos proved that true worship of God goes far beyond solemn rituals or lavish ceremonies. It is revealed in acts of justice, in caring for those who suffer, and in the courage to speak the truth. He stood up for those without a voice, denouncing inequalities that many preferred to ignore. Although he was just a simple shepherd, Amos demonstrated the strength of one who is called by God, someone willing to undertake a difficult mission, even when the world refuses to listen. His message still resonates today. Whenever we act with kindness and defend the weakest, we keep alive the seed that he planted. Amos reminds us that God can use us anywhere to accomplish extraordinary things, no matter if we have titles or vast knowledge. What matters is the willingness to listen and obey. While confronting kings and priests, Amos pointed out that without integrity, all songs and offerings become empty. For him, genuine faith required a heart committed to justice. He also taught that we cannot turn our backs on injustice, for that would make us complicit in evil. When he cried out for a river of justice, he showed that God's will is not merely theoretical but practical. It must flow like water, cleansing and bringing life wherever it passes. After fulfilling his mission, Amos disappeared from the narratives. Some believe that he returned to the fields of Tekoa. Others think he continued proclaiming the truth in distant places. But what really matters is that his courage paved the way for a reflection that endures for generations. He taught us that if God invites us to a task, he will sustain us. It doesn't matter how simple or ordinary we may seem. And you? Are you willing to accept this challenge and be part of the change the world needs? Today, we can follow Amos's example by denouncing corruption, by helping those in need, or by caring to build a more equal society. This act of justice starts within our hearts and extends to the small choices of daily life, from being honest in every transaction to treating everyone with dignity and respect. The strongest lesson Amos left was that God can use anyone to do good, even if they seem ordinary and without important titles. We can all be agents of transformation, as long as we remain focused on what is right. True faith, as Amos taught, demands that we stand up for those who have no voice, that we are sensitive to the pain of others, and that we let God's love overflow in practical gestures. Thus, when we look at our current reality, the challenge remains the same: to choose justice instead of easy profit, truth instead of appearances, and love instead of indifference. This call remains alive, and the question persists: will we have the same courage as Amos to obey God and fight for a more just world? This is the Mysteries of Faith channel, and this was the story of Amos. If you want to continue following other tales of faith and perseverance, leave your like, share this video, and subscribe to the channel. It was a pleasure to be with you once again. I'm leaving 2 special videos at the end. Go check them out. Thank you very much and see you next time.